Hi, welcome to ADHD Content Creator. I am your host, Jennifer, aka Vegan Tech Nomad, and today I'm joined by a wonderful guest, Paige, aka Ask Auntie Paige on Twitter. We will be sharing some wisdom about failing fabulously, which I'm so excited to learn about, and some touching wisdom and life stories. So, Paige, you actually found me on Twitter, and I'm curious, what made you reach out to me?
Well, I love the idea of reaching out to ADHD creators. I have a long history with neurodivergence myself. Let me kind of back up and just kind of give you. Let's start with the ADHD part. When I was younger, I'm 58 years old. Hi everybody! I'm so excited to be here. This is my first podcast and my first chance to really kind of talk about my mission and my vision and what I'm trying to do. And so when I saw you on Twitter, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly who I want to talk to." When I was younger, like I said, I'm 58, and a lot of you don't realize people that have been diagnosed with ADHD or autism or anything on the spectrum, those terms did not exist when I was growing up. When I was getting my master's degree in social work, there still was not a diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder, and that was in 1999 that I was getting my master's. The diagnosis for ADHD didn't exist until 1984 when I was getting my bachelor's degree in speech communications. So those of us who were older and who went through our lives knowing that we were different, knowing that we were unique and special in some way, we didn't have a label that we could, stamp on our heads and say, here, that helps explain a little bit about who I am. And so when I was younger, I was an Air Force brat. My dad is a retired Air Force pilot. And I had the most amazing parents in the entire world. My mom and dad came from not great parents themselves, and they decided that they were going to become great parents when we came along. And my sister and I are as different as each other as we are from the rest of the world. We are both very neurodivergent, but there weren't terms for it. There wasn't an explanation for it. So when my parents moved to a new town, Air Force brats, we move every few years. We moved to a new town. There was a program at the school where I was going, and it was for kids like me. And my mom knew that I needed to be in this program. We chose the school district based on that. And when we got to the school said, yeah, no, this is a cohort. It's a fixed group that is going to go all the way through high school, and we're going to test them. This was when I was probably 13, maybe 14 years old. And my mom knew that I was special. She knew that I was gifted because I'm just that kind of gifted. I'm the kind of ADHD that gets gold stars and not gets sent to the hall. And so she knew that I should be in this program, but they didn't want me to be in it. So she paid for me to be tested by herself because she knew that my test scores would stand for themselves. So I went to the psychologist and they're doing all this testing, and I was really just kind of acing it. I test really, really well until the doctor handed me a piece of paper and a pencil. And he said, okay, now I want you to draw a self portrait. I'm like, okay, I know how I see myself. And so I started drawing, and I would erase, and I started getting really upset because I had aced the test up to this point. I know who I am. Self awareness is not a problem for me. But what I was drawing did not match how I saw myself. It didn't match the image that I was trying to, get my hands to create. And so I started crying, and the doctor was like, wait, hold on. And he said, we aren't testing. It was the gifted program is what was being tested for. And he said, we're not testing to see if you're gifted in every area. Nobody is gifted in every area. What we're trying to do is figure out in which areas you're gifted so that you can focus your time on those. And that I assumed everybody else got that memo growing up. You're good at one thing, he's good at one thing, she's good at something else. What we're supposed to do is figure out what I'm good at so that I can do most what I do best in the way that works best for me, and then find other people who can do things that I'm not as good at. So back to your original question, which is why did I reach out to you? I know that I have a message that needs to be told, and I know that it needs to be told to your audience and you and all the people that are like us that don't have that one thing that I had, which was the understanding that, you know, everybody has their own, I call it your stack of sticks, your strengths, your traits, your idiosyncrasies, quirks, and skills that come with you. And so, the reason I reached out to you is because I have a story to tell, but I haven't been able to get started. That's the problem that those of us with ADHD have with the executive dysfunctioning have is getting started. I have so much knowledge. And by talking to you, I'm going to have to try to come up with a way to share that knowledge in a way that is kind of concise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember reading this story in your newsletter actually, and there were parts of it that really resonated with me. Like, you don't have to be good at everything, and you shouldn't expect to be good at everything. I'm not good at cleaning my room. Some people are really good at cleaning, but that's just not one of my strengths. But there was also this other thing that you said that really resonated with me. You said, I know who I am. So this leads me to think about labels and expectations. So I want to dive more into that because, I was reading up all these ADHD symptoms because everybody was like, I can see these in you. But then I was like, is this even true? I thought I knew who I was. And now I'm like, my self identity is shaken. So can you share a little bit about your take on labels and expectations and their impact on our own self perceptions?
Absolutely. This is my favorite thing to talk about. When I was getting my degree in communications in college, I learned about something that is called the Johari window. All right. All of us have a quadrant of ourselves. Okay. There are things about us that we know. You know this about yourself. Everybody who knows you. If I walk in your room right now, I know that you have doom piles because I made you move stuff from behind you. I know these things about me. You know these things about me. That is called the open quadrant of our Johari window. And Johari window is it's a communication tool. And so when I understand that there are things about myself that I know, and there are things about you that I know, and things about me that you know, it is what it is. That's just I call that the eagle's eye view. An eagle looking up can see all the stuff around them. Now, there's also below that another known quadrant, and those are things I know about myself that you don't know about me. As we're talking here, you're going to learn some things about me, but the things you're going to learn about me are the things that are in my open quadrant. They're the things that I am willing to share about you. There are things you're going to learn about my personality and those little quirks that I'm talking about. But there's also a part of me that stays hidden that you will never know about unless I choose to share that. And that hidden part of ourselves, often we mistake for being hidden. In the top of on the other side of the Johari window, there is something called our blind quadrant. And the blind spot are the things that everybody else knows about us that we don't know about ourselves. See, what I found out is that there's a lot of things about myself that I think are hidden that everybody knows. I'm terrible with time. I am terrible with, you should see the mess behind my desk. I'm terrible if we call things by deficit. There are certain things about me that are my blind spots. Now, the fact that you know things about me that I don't know about myself can be very disarming, especially for those of us who are neurodivergent and on the ADHD side, where our brains are constantly asking us, "What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing?" Is that your experience?
Yeah, it's like I'm always trying to be the best, even if it's not natural to me. So, like, I don't know how to explain it, but it just feels like I'm constantly failing.
Yeah, yeah, that's why we're gonna talk about failing fabulously. Now, the bottom corner of the Johari window down is, what's known as the unknown quadrant. There are things about you that you don't know, and there are things about you or, about me that you don't know, and there are things about me that I don't know. There are things that we're constantly expanding. The problem you get when you start trying to be the best at things you're not the best at is that blind spot. Anybody else, I can explain to you real quick when I was younger, we didn't have TikTok, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have memes. We had a poster, and it was a ballerina. It was on every wall, and there was this ballerina, and it said, "If you can dream it, you can believe it, and if you can believe it, you can achieve it," or some shit like, sorry, some stuff like that. And I looked at that, and I had already taken ballet lessons and realized I am so uncoordinated. I don't really know where my body is in space most of the time. And so becoming a ballerina was not an option for me. And so when I would look at that poster, and it was everywhere. Anybody my age knows this poster. I'd look at that poster, I'm like, that's not true. And I would have cognitive dissonance. My mind would look at that and say, that is not true. And they are selling you a lie when they tell you that you can do anything, you can be anything. Most self help advice is written for eagles, for the apex predator, for the people that want to go make $1 million and rule a company and be the as you called it, the best. But the problem is there's only one best of anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when I was starting out as a content creator and, like, you mentioned you were starting out as UGC creator. I was told by everybody that you needed a plan, you needed a content calendar, you had to have a schedule, and I was like, I tried, but it didn't work for me. So I had to find my own method, which is why I started this podcast because I was like, why is nobody talking about this?
Yeah, no, and that's fantastic. That goes back again to your first question, which was, why did I reach out to you? I reached out to you because there's a lie, and it is the biggest lie that we have been told. And I am very passionate about this. You'll see my trademark word. I've just written my first book. It's called Through the Hummingbird's Eye, a Neurosparkle Manifesto, and it's about the illusion of choice. We have this stupid idea, like that poster when I was when I was a kid, that said you can do anything you want. You just got to want it bad enough. That's that's horse crap. That is not true, because it does not matter how much I want to be a ballerina. It doesn't matter how much I try to be a ballerina. It doesn't matter how much, how many lessons and how good of a ballet coach I try. I am never going to succeed in something that I am not made to do. So for me to try harder to be a less mediocre ballerina is a waste of my time. It's a waste of my energy. And the only thing it's going to do is make me feel bad about myself for not being something that I'm not designed to be.
I think I have a different take on that if you don't want me to.
I want to.
Using the ballerina example, I think if you really like personally, I don't want to be a ballerina, but I think if I really, really wanted to and really enjoyed it, maybe I could. And I might be really bad at it, but it would be good enough for me because I prioritize fun. Like if I enjoy doing it, why not do it even if it sucks? But if you're trying to be like the world's best ballerina, like maybe after a long time you could work sorry, you can work at it and like succeed, but then it's like you might have to suffer a lot more. And at that point, you have to understand like why do you want to be a ballerina so bad? Like, is there actually something else that can meet that need or meet that core thing that you want better than ballerina? Maybe it's like dance or something else. So it comes from really asking yourself these questions and knowing yourself. And I guess being okay with failing, which, you talk about feeling fabulously, and now I'm so curious about what that means.
This is fantastic. Failing fabulously has nothing to do with patting myself on the back when I fail. Failing sucks. I hate failing. I am the most competitive person you are ever going to meet. And one of the things that I don't know if you're familiar with rejection sensitive dysphoria, but are you? Okay.
Yeah, I actually, to jump into that, before you start
Yeah.
talking about failing, I thought I had the most thick skin ever because people would tell me stuff. I'd be like, that's not true. I don't believe that. Hey, I have such thick skin, but it's not true until like I start believing it's true. And then when people criticize me about something that's already an insecurity, I'm like suddenly the most sensitive person ever who takes everything personally. So
Right, right, and that, what they tell you when you're gonna start writing, that you've got to figure out what problem you're going to solve. There is a problem that needs to be solved. If I can solve this problem, I promise you I'm gonna make millions of dollars. There's no question in my mind because people are dying for what I'm about to tell you, all right? So, buckle up, Buttercup, because here it is. The number one thing you need to learn is how to get to know, the word N-O, all right? Not how to take no, not how to take rejection, not how to learn to, every time I write with ChatGPT or Claude or, the AI, and I try to see if it understands what I mean when I talk about failing fabulously, it always tries to water down my words and say, failure is a stair step and it's a learning experience. And I say, failure sucks. I hate failing. So what I decided was I would choose how I keep score, not how I define what a ballerina is. A ballerina is a pretty simple word. A ballerina is someone who dances ballet. What does the word mean to you? So take the word ballerina out there and say, I want to become comfortable in my own skin and I want to dance creatively and I want to express myself through my movement. And can I do that? Hell yeah, I can do that really, really well. And if you see me dancing, at my house, you're going to say, yes, that is very creative, Paige. You're not going to mistake me for a ballerina, though. I was a flight attendant, one of my many careers. Before I met my husband and we did what we do now, which I don't know if we've mentioned. My husband and I photograph hotels for a living. Our primary business is we photograph hotels all over the country. I'll get back to that, that story a little while ago, but we are really good at what we do, and we've been doing it for 15 years, and I'm ready to start doing something else. But before that, I had 40 jobs in 40 years because I tried things, and if I didn't like them, I tried it for 2 days and I'd go, "This is not a good fit for me. This doesn't work for me. This doesn't work for me." But I didn't go into it trying to succeed. I went into it all trying to learn. Back to the flight attendant days. When I was a flight attendant, you start out as a flight attendant on what's called reserve. You don't get to know where you're going. You don't get to choose how long you're going to stay. You are on call and they call you and say, "Hey, Paige, we're going to send you to Cleveland for a week and you're going to sit at the airport, just be on call." The crew scheduling loved me because they said one morning, they said, "We just love you, Paige. We could call you and say, 'Hey, we're sending you to hell.'" And you'd say, "Oh, cool. I've never been there before." Because I realized at that point, it wasn't my choice where I went. I had chosen to be a reserve flight attendant. And when you start out as a flight attendant, you go where the heck they send you. You don't get to choose your schedule. You don't get to choose much of anything. The only thing you get to choose is your attitude about it. So I have been traveling my entire life. My husband and I travel now. We're down to where we only work about maybe 6 to 8 days a month. I think we're working 2 this month. We have created a lifestyle that really fits for us. And when we first started our business and we were building, the answer was yes. If somebody said, "Hey, can you drive to California and take a picture of, of this boarding school?" Our answer was yes. We've never been there before. And we had a list of all the states, and when we would do a job in that state, I'd check it off. Let me go back a little bit to my origin story, if you don't mind, because this is it all kinda circles around. When I met my husband, he and I were both in transition. He had been a professional photographer. He has a degree in commercial photography. And he was going through a transition. He got divorced before we met. And I was going through a transition. I had been with a partner who passed away, and we had a business together. And I was in the financial services industry. At that point, I was executive for one of the largest financial services companies in the world, making tons of money. And then the market crashed. And when the market crashed, being a recruiter for the largest financial services company that's on the news every day, it's not a really good job. So when Greg and I met, we were starting over. We had nothing. I had lost my house. I lost my car. It was a country music song. We were broke. Both of us were broke, and we were starting over. And we didn't care what we did. We met on Craigslist. I don't know if you even know where Craigslist. I was living in Atlanta at the time. There was a string of murders of single women, just not related in any way. But I like to bike. I like to hike. I like to do all these things. I had a big dog. I like to take my dog walking in the mountains. But 3 women had been murdered, one on the bike trail where I used to ride, one on the mountain where I used to walk my dog, and one just walking down, the street. And so I realized to myself, maybe I'm not invincible. Maybe I should use a little common sense here. And so I put an ad on Craigslist under what was called Strictly Platonic. And I said, let's get something straight. We're not going to kiss. We're not going to hold hands. This is not a date. We are not meeting for anything. But I like to bike. I like to hike. I like to kayak. I like to camp. And I like to not be murdered. So assuming you're not a murderer, would you like to do some of those things with me? We met for ice cream in a public place to make sure, he wasn't going to put me in a van and take me somewhere. And our first not date lasted 3 hours, and our second not date lasted 3 days. After about a week.
Days?
Days, yeah. So after about a week, he's the one that came to me and he said, "I don't know what's going on here, but there's obviously something bigger going on than either of us had planned. What about we just do this? Let's just live this. Let's just know that if it ends tomorrow, that we are both better for the experience and we are better for having met. And let's take it day by day." So he was on unemployment. I got a job. Or no, actually, he was working for the U.S. Census, which is where he realized that working for somebody is not a fit for him. He has always been an entrepreneur. I had always had a job and I was on unemployment. So long story, a little bit shorter, we got married. And again, we were still broke. We went on our honeymoon and we bartered our honeymoon. We were going to do a virtual tour of the condo that we were staying in on the beach. We were broke. While we were down there, I was working for a behavioral health program for troubled kids. There was a kid in rehab in Florida where we were for our honeymoon. And I said, I'm going to go visit this kid. And when I did, I met the head of their marketing, she worked with me, their admissions person. And I told her about the virtual tour we had done for my school. I used to talk to parents who are calling to, send their kids away. I finally realized doing the virtual tour gave them something to see so that they could ask questions, that were informed questions going forward. So I told the person about this. I said, "Hey, we've got our equipment because we bartered for our honeymoon. And if you want, I'll charge you, 250 bucks or whatever it was to do a virtual tour of your program." And it was the second one we done because we had done my program and then this program. We got back from our honeymoon and I got a call from their marketing department. Come to find out they were the largest behavioral health program in the country. They said, "What's your territory?" And I'm like, "What do you want our territory to be?" And so they sent us off on a 10,000-mile road trip. They wrote us a check up front. Remember, we were broke. I mean, we were so broke. They wrote us a check for $15,000 and said, "Go get them, Tiger." So we left on, it was 10,000 miles around the whole country. We had 12 jobs when we left. But what we would do when we'd get on the road is I'd pick up the phone and I'd say, "Hey, we're coming to South Dakota and we're photographing this behavioral health program, psych hospital. I saw your bed and breakfast. We kind of need a place to stay tonight. If you would let us stay there for free, we'll photograph the bed and breakfast and give you the virtual tour in exchange for a stay." When we got home from that trip, we had done 54 jobs in 53 days. We left with 12. We were going to be gone for the whole 54 days. And we came back with an entire portfolio of hotels and bed and breakfast and restaurants and then the behavioral health stuff. So we just made our business by doing what came next. And you talked about that a little bit earlier when you were saying everybody told you you had to have a plan. And some people do. Don't get me wrong. There are some people who need a plan. And then there's some people who don't. We do better when we just kind of do what comes next. And so that's how we started our business.
Wow. Okay, first of all, I love your love story with your husband. That was so cute. I made a few interesting observations. You mentioned you were in your honeymoon, but then you still like quote unquote worked. Like you did the virtual tour and everything. What makes me wonder, like a lot of people out there, they're like, you need boundaries, you need to say no. But I found that a lot of my decisions, I'm like, no, I want to do things. I enjoy my work. So I feel like sometimes I don't want to say no, but then I do too many things and it's like, I get overwhelmed because I'm chasing all these different things. Because we were talking about failure, I'm wondering, is that need to do so many different things because of my fear of failure? I find myself at 3 a.m. after 2 hours going through Notion formulas that I'll never revisit again because I'm fearing that if I don't go back to that, I'll never get it done. How is this all related? Like, how do you balance this failure thing with, like, boundaries and saying no?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question because that's actually where I was trying to go when I think in circles. That's part of the way my brain works. Remember I was telling you when I was a flight attendant, I had the opportunity to go where in the hell they told me to go. So it really wasn't that I didn't get to say no. Say no, you don't have your job anymore. I learned at that point that it's really about my attitude of what I say yes to. When Greg and I started our business, the answer was, yeah, we'll go anywhere. If someone was willing to pay us money to go somewhere, the answer was yes. We were chasing experiences, we were building a portfolio, and we were doing the things that we needed to do to be able to establish our systems, to establish our bank account. To be when we were traveling, we had that 15 grand, and I realized neither of us have jobs when we get home. We could make this money last, and we could turn this into a business. So when I first started, it was yes, wherever somebody wanted us to go. Well, the reason I'm looking at my calendar right now. We worked on the 1st of this month and we're going to work on the 31st of this month. And we're not working again the rest of this month because my answer to the question, should I take this trip, is no longer automatically yes. 2 years ago, I became a caregiver for my parents. My mother passed away a year ago, and I'm still a caregiver for my dad, but he just this week moved into a nursing home. So the priority for me over the last really 15 years since I met my husband was to be available for my parents. My dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 15 years ago, and the diagnosis wasn't actually correct. But because Alzheimer's is very similar to ADHD, and I am certified ADHD, there's no question. I was able to watch the way that his brain worked and watch the progression so that a couple of years ago when it came time to be a full-time caregiver, we had created our life around our first principle, which was I will be available for my parents when the time comes that they need me. Now, in the meantime, we have photographed in 48 states. We've been to 5 different countries. We go to Nicaragua several times a year. We live in a 750 square foot house on the Mississippi River, and I have 100 hummingbirds during the year, during the summer, and I have 100 eagles during the winter. Yeah, so we built our life in the meantime so that now that the meantime is over, that season of my life is over, I am not at 58 starting my life. I'm not starting my dream. Our company is called Vision Quest Ltd, and the Ltd stands for Living the Dream. So, what I ask myself now is,
That just blew my mind.
which part?
The LTD. That's genius.
LTD, Living the Dream, is about living the dream in the meantime. It's not about your dream is not a destination. In the line in my book, it says, "We live our dreams. We don't chase our aspirations." And I identify as a hummingbird. That's why this is my book, and it's through the eye. You'll have to flip it when you post it, but through the eye of a hummingbird, a Neurosparkle manifesto, and it's really my story. So now what I ask myself when somebody calls me, had somebody call a couple of days ago and say, "Hey, we have a huge job." I mean, it would have been a lot of money. I don't say yes anymore. I say, "Should I take this trip?" Okay. And so I have created, and I'm getting ready to launch a course and relaunch my newsletter and write a book. And here is the foundation for how you get to know. All right. First, it's should I take this trip? And it's TRIP. TRIP. T, you tackle the topic. You ask yourself, what do I know about this? Let's go back to my ballerina thing. What do I know about ballerinas? Ballerinas are skinny. I am not skinny. Ballerinas probably have been doing it since they were very young and have learned certain skills. In the book, The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about proficiency comes after you have spent 10,000 hours doing something. The people who are professional basketball players didn't start playing basketball when they were 18, 20. They started playing basketball as a young person and they learned muscle memory doing these things. So T, tackle the topic. What do I know about this thing? What's the eagle's eye view? What's the big picture? And I do that by identifying what is. It is what it is. All right. But who defines it? What is it? When we talked about learning to be a ballerina as a profession is not an option for me. I can't choose that. If I define it as creative movement, then I can do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we tackled the topic. What is it that we're talking about? Let's identify what it is that you're talking about, your special interests, the things that you want to do. I want to start a podcast, but you saw how hard it was for me to get the freaking computer on and how nervous I got to that. So instead of deciding that I want to start a podcast, I go to R, which is research the role. Research the role is asking yourself, is there another way to look at this? I've created what I call the bird brain archetypes. And the eagle is the what if. The eagle is, I mean, the what is. The eagle is the big picture. The eagle's the apex predator. They're in charge. Who would I have to convince that I could be a ballerina? I couldn't convince anybody because that's not for me. But let's research the role. Is there another way by being a guest on your podcast, not by spending 6 weeks trying to figure out, how to create a podcast? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the best case scenario for me if I were to try this? Do I feel like I think I would be good at a podcast if I, got the stuff in place. But the better role for me right now is to be a guest on other people's podcasts, not to do my own. And so I've identified that my role would be better there. Now that gives me the opportunity to go to the TRI, and I stands for Interrogate Your Inklings. What does your gut tell you? Does your gut tell you that figuring out the technical stuff of being a podcast would be the best use of my time? You've only known me for a day. You're going to probably know that that's not the best place for me to start. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
So
like how you
go ahead.
actually stopped to think about what matters to you and who you are as a person. Because usually I just jump right into it. I don't do this research interrogation thing.
Yeah, well, that's why I told you, if I can figure out a way to package and understand there is such a need for people who do not know how to get to know. They say, well, maybe I could do something. Well, assume you could and decide if you should. Interrogate your inklings. What does your gut tell you? Does your gut tell you that you would be good at this? Okay, great. Then now you go to the question, what now? What would I have to do? Assume that I could become really good as a podcaster. What would I need to do? What would the steps be that would take me to the point that one day I'm interviewing you because your podcast has gotten so successful and it's a year from now and I have a podcast and I'm interviewing you as my first guest? What was the best case scenario? If everything goes my way, if I am allowed to do exactly what I know is right for me and the way that is best for me, what is the best case scenario? Now, what if I'm allowed to do everything my way? Everything just, it is, I'm in charge of the steps. How am I going to fail? What do I know about myself that is going to cause me to fail? I have a coach who I work with, and I asked him that question when I started talking to him about my vision. And I said, Brandon, what is going to make me fail? And he said, a small technical glitch, because he knows that where I'm going to fail is by getting caught up on what we did earlier, where is my headphone working? And so then now I'm all in my brain about technical stuff that does not help you and it does not help me and it stops me from moving forward. So then the final question in our TRIP is P, and it's practice pragmatic positivity. Ask yourself, yeah, assume you can do it. Let's pretend that everything went great. Assume you could do it. Should you? And if the answer is no, then your answer is, and you move on.
That was actually so wise. So, like you're saying, to get to know before you make an important decision, you need to go through these steps. Trip. T is topic,
Tackle the
what you
topic.
know about it. R is research about the topic.
Not research the topic. T is the topic. What do I know about podcasting, about whatever it is that we're talking about? R is, how would I be? What role would I play? Would I be better as a guest on your podcast, or would I be rather better as a podcast host? I don't know the answer to that until I do some of these. So R is research the role. See who's doing it right that you want to follow. My favorite podcast is My First Million. I don't Have you ever seen that podcast?
Yeah.
I watch that podcast obsessively. I see myself in these guys because they are doing exactly what I want to do one day. They figured out how to live the life that they want to live, and they just sit around and talk about it. So researching the role is about you. It's about me. It's about deciding, am I the right person for this job?
So topic, researching the topic and learning more about it. Research is more about you. Like instead of external, the topic, it's more internal.
Right.
Your role in the topic.
Right, exactly.
And then I is interrogate, right?
Interrogate your inklings. There's that little tiny voice in your head that you don't listen to because you have allowed somebody else's voice to tell you, you know what you should do? Newsletter topic when I relaunched my newsletter is, when somebody is telling me what I should do, then that's great. Is that for me or is that for them? So interrogate your inklings. Listen to that voice that says, Paige, you're not a ballerina. You know, you're going to make a fool of yourself if you try to pursue this. And we don't listen to that voice. We have stopped listening to that voice because stupid pop culture has told us you can do anything you want to do if you just try hard enough.
So this is kind of like honing your intuition, right? If you're like, I think I want this, but my body is telling me no, then do I really want this?
Exactly. And that's where the first book that I wrote, my Through the Hummingbird's Eye, you talk about, all these little things you start. I have over 10,000 pages of writing that I have done because in the last 2 years, I have been lucky if I could drink a cup of coffee, much less sit down and do something for myself. My dad had a stroke. I moved in to become a full-time caregiver for him. And then suddenly my mother got sick and she died. She was the one that was supposed to be well. So for 2 years, I have not had a chance to do anything other than when I'd have a thought, I would scribble it down. I would write it down. So I have all this stuff. It's valuable. It's great. I just don't know where to put it. I don't know where to go with it. I could have said, okay, I'm not going to start until I'm ready. Well, when are you ever going to be ready? I don't know about you, but everybody I know is either in a crisis, coming out of a crisis, or about to go into a crisis. There is no time in your life when it's all going to be great. And then you start.
Okay, so it's about making time for your priorities.
20% of my time is spent ruling out what doesn't serve me. I spend more time trying to figure out why something won't work than I do trying to make it work. That first job when they called and said, "Hey, what's your territory?" I got a atlas out. Those are, that's a map. And we still had map quest back then. I'm not that old, but I put the map out and I made a dot of all of their spots that they wanted us to go. I figured out how I could take that $15,000 and make it pay for, this trip. This is before we told them the price. I was like, "This is how much it's gonna cost us. This is what we're gonna wanna do. If I'm gonna go to Utah, I'm gonna go see the national parks. If I'm gonna go to Oregon, then I'm gonna stop in Idaho." I created the map first, the logistics. I figured out, at the time, remember we were broke? We didn't have a car that I trusted to drive 10,000 miles. So we had to make the decision before we left. What are we gonna do? Are we gonna try to buy a car? Are we going to rent a car? What we decided to do was just take the car, and we knew it would die on the road. It dropped dead halfway through the trip, and we had to buy a car one morning. But we had the money available to do that. Before you move, you ask yourself, should I take this trip? Does this require action? The hummingbirds, the reason I write about the birds is because there are 4 different birds. I talked about the owl, the hummingbird, the eagle, and the parrot. What works for an eagle would kill a hummingbird. Eagles wait until the situation is right. The eagle sits in his nest, and when he sees a rabbit, he decides, can I get to that rabbit in time to eat it? Because if not, I'm not going to waste my energy on that. If an eagle is watching a hummingbird, are you familiar with hummingbirds? Do you ever watch them? Okay, so they flit about, and you see them doing, and they go to here, they go to there. What you don't know about hummingbirds is at night, a hummingbird goes into what's called torpor. It's basically a coma. At the end of the night, the hummingbird gets the last sip of nectar that they need to be able to go into a coma and sleep through the night. And then they get up and they do the same thing over. What people don't understand about the hummingbirds, though, is not all hummingbirds, but the ones that are at my house, they also migrate twice a year. They go down to either Nicaragua or Costa Rica. So one night a year, that hummingbird who goes during the summer, they're going to take off and they're going to fly over the Gulf of Mexico, and they're going to fly 500 miles in one fell swoop. There's nowhere to stop. There's nowhere to, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Maybe I should turn around and go back. Hummingbird's going to take off, and they're not going to do it. You said they're not going to have a plan and say, all right, now if I get to Mexico and I decide I don't want to go further, I'll stop there. Their map is written in their DNA. When they are born, their body knows where they're supposed to go. And so the reason I wrote about the birds is because somehow we have decided that we are evolved species and we are supposed to ignore what our bodies tell us, that we're supposed to take advice that is not meant for us. And we are supposed to listen. The hummingbird goes to bed at night as the owl is coming out to hunt, because the owls are nocturnal. The owls can see in the dark. The owls are designed to hunt at night. And if the owl is looking at the hummingbird and saying, "You are so lazy. Do you not realize that this is the prime hunting time?" Hummingbird's going to go, "For you it is, but not for me." The eagles are going to say, "You need to stay put because winter is coming." The hummingbird's going to look at the eagle and say, "If I stay here, I'm going to die. I eat off flowers. I don't eat rabbits. I don't eat fish. I need to go where the flowers are." And so my book was written to take those 10,000 pages of writing about neurodivergence, about unconventional high achievers. I call my neurodivergence my neurosparkle. And neurosparkle is a word that I used because we didn't have a word. We didn't have, technically, I'm ADHD probably. I also have a genius IQ. So I score like way, way above Mensa on that kind of stuff, which doesn't make me always very relatable. I talk too much. I talk too high. They tell you when you're a creator, you're supposed to use small words and small sentences and speak to everybody. I don't speak to everybody. I speak my truth. And if it resonates with you, great. If we're done with this podcast and you go, "That woman is a nut," delete it. I don't care. I'm not going to not speak what I know to try to reach your audience. Does that may sound cruel, and I don't mean it to, but does that make sense?
No, I love it actually because it's like so authentic and it feels like you're very secure because a lot of people they'd be like, "Oh, if you delete this podcast that I was a guest on," like they take it personally, but you're like, "Well, I'm just gonna speak my truth and you can do what you want because It kind of goes back to the P from T.R.I.P,
Yep,
the practice pragmatic positivity,
yep.
but from what I'm hearing, it kind of sounds like power, like know what's within your power because when you were talking about this 15K gig that you got, it was like you could easily say like, "Well, it's not in my power to do something, like, I don't have this car," but then it's like, well, no, you can map it out and then give them the price that includes all of that, like, it's in your power and control to do that.
Right, and you know what they can say?
What?
"No, no." I'm like, "Okay, cool." See, our problem is that we have been convinced that we are the chooser. You know, the remember my thing is the chooser gets to choose. But if you're not the chooser, you don't get to choose what happens to you. You only get to choose how you see it. In especially in this last 2 years when I have not been in control. And I'll back up and I'll tell you something kind of interesting as to where my self-awareness came from. My mother and I, have you seen the telepathy or listened to the telepathy tapes? Okay, it's a podcast about nonverbal autistic people who have a telepathic connection, mostly with their mothers, and the children can communicate directly with their mothers without words. These are nonverbal children who have a entire world inside their brains that they're not able to translate. Words require motor function and skills that like when I was trying to draw the picture of myself, I saw the vision of who I was. I'm relatively attractive. I've got okay everything. And I don't delude myself to think that I'm something other than I am, but I couldn't get my hand to create the picture that I saw in my head. And that's the challenge that a lot of people, excuse me, who are nonverbal have, or people like myself who are hyperverbal, is taking your words and having them reflect what you're trying to say. So these kids are able to communicate with each other and with their mothers. And my mom and I had that type of connection. My mom and I had an ESP. If you've never experienced anything like it, I don't expect you to believe me. If you have, you don't need me to explain it to you. But I was sitting watching TV one night, and my mom and dad and I were sitting, and I said to myself in my mind, "I want breakfast food for dinner." And my mother said out loud, "Pancakes or omelets?" And I said, "Let's do pancakes." My dad's like, "What?" She said she wanted breakfast for dinner, and we realized, no, I didn't, but that's how we would talk. We had a bond that was unbelievable, a whole 'nother story for a whole 'nother day, and this is in the days, before cell phones and before I had a beeper when I was a flight attendant, but I had a major crisis in my life, and my mom had volunteered for something, for 3 days over the weekend, and she got to her station, and all of a sudden, something was happening in my life that was she didn't know anything about. And she said, "I have to leave." She went to the person in charge and she said, "I have a family emergency and I need to go home." And she went home and she packed and then she called my dad and said, "You need to get here right away. We need to be ready to leave." And he said, "Why?" And she said, "I don't know yet." Shortly after that, my sister called and told her my boyfriend had died. My mom knew while it was happening that I was going to need her. My entire life, I have had somebody who I didn't have to use words to communicate how I feel. I didn't have to tell her, "Hey, there's something going on with me." We knew each other. But in the last 2 years, as she began to decline, physically and mentally, for the first time in my life, I didn't have that one person who I didn't have to explain myself to. And I realized that what I need to do is be that person for other people, not to, pat you on the back. I'm sure that I would love you if I get to know you, but I'm not going to get to know you because I don't like people and I don't do personal relationships. I know this about myself. But if you can see yourself through my eyes, using the trip metaphor, using what I call my daily vision questionnaire, where you ask yourself, what am I feeling? What kind of energy am I bringing into this situation? Is there a different way that I could look at this? Then maybe I can create something that I can make a lot of money on because let's be honest, if you have a job, if you have a hobby and you're not getting paid for it, it's a hobby. If I'm going to invest my time and my effort and my energy, I want to make big bucks. I mean, isn't that what you're talking about to creators is let's figure out how we can make money, not how we can run ourselves in circles.
Oh, I love that. You said that with so much confidence as well. Like you really seem like you know yourself. That story with your mom was so sweet. I kind of wish I could experience what it is, but I don't think I've ever experienced anything like that, which I don't think a lot of people have. And you were talking about diagnoses earlier and like misdiagnoses. I'm wondering, like, you seem to have a very secure sense of who you are. Same with your mom, like you had that connection. But what about for people who don't have that connection or people who don't believe you and they're like, oh, you're not that, you're something else? Like, how do you get to know yourself well then?
I decide whether my self-awareness has almost nothing to do with your understanding of me. Now, when it comes to being in a car with the man that I'm married to, who is as opposite of me as anybody in the world could be. We fit like this. I mean, where my weaknesses are, his strengths are. Where his strengths are, my weaknesses are. And at first, that's really cool and exciting. And it's like, oh, wow. When we make decisions, if we make them quickly, it's because he has seen this side, I have seen this side. And all of a sudden, we realize there's no gap. But when we get to the point where he doesn't understand what I'm trying to say, when he can't see the vision of what I see, but we make decisions together. I care very, very deeply about his opinion is of me, whether I have communicated myself to him in a way that he can understand. And so, first of all, to answer that question, it is you decide whose voices you choose to have in your head. Now, there's going to be a million voices in your head. You can't not listen to the ones that are the doubts and those kind of things. But what you can do is identify them and say, whose voice is that? Who is speaking to me? Where did that noise come from? Remember I said interrogate your inklings? When you identify whether it's your voice you're listening to or somebody else's voice, then you can say, "Thank you, I appreciate your input, but I'm going to take this through my trip metaphor. What do I know about what you said? What do I know about myself? What do I know about in my heart? What do I know in my gut?" I'll assume you're right if you give me feedback. I want feedback. I crave feedback. My biggest fear is not getting feedback. And when you are very self-aware, when you are very confident, and when you're very successful, people stop giving you feedback. They assume that you just know.
Yeah, I love that. I'm also really excited. This conversation really gave me so much energy. And if it gave you, the listener, some energy too, make sure to leave in the comments something like a piece of feedback for Paige or anything you enjoyed or didn't really have clarity on or even didn't enjoy. Feel free to let us know. It would be super helpful. Yeah, thank you so much, Auntie Paige. And I will leave all the links in the description and show notes for people to check out.